Today we have Dr. Karen Bluth with us. She is an associate professor emerita at the University of North Carolina, where she studies how mindful self-compassion improves mental health of teens and young adults. She is the author of 5 books for teens and caregivers, including the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens and Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens in Schools. In addition, she is the 2022 recipient of the Mind and Life Foundation Award for Public Communication and Contemplative Research. What an honor! As a mindfulness practitioner for over 45 years and a mindfulness teacher and educator with 18 years of classroom teaching experience, Dr. Bluth frequently gives talks, conducts workshops, and teaches classes in self-compassion in educational and community settings, and trains teachers in mindful self-compassions for teens internationally. Karen, it's such a joy to have you on.
It's my pleasure to be here, Cynthia.
We are excited to learn about the cross-section of self-compassion and teens. And you are a successful researcher in your academic career and also an author on self-compassion. How did you discover your passion for teaching self-compassion to teens?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long story. I really started when I was a teen myself and struggling a lot. And I needed a topic for an independent study project for my English class. I was a senior in high school, and I didn't know what I was going to do it on, and it was due the next day. And I remember driving down the road and seeing at the side, kind of out of the corner of my eye, a sign about TM, Transcendental Meditation. And I remembered hearing something about Zen Buddhism in a different class, in my social studies class. And there was something about it that resonated with me. So I turned in and I got some information, and I ended up starting to practice transcendental meditation. And this was 1975. So that started my mindfulness practice. There were some gaps early on, but it started as TM from 1985 or so on, was mindfulness practice, Vipassana practice. So that was my mindfulness practice. And then in my Sangha, my weekly meditation group, we had, and this was now in the 90s, we had a cassette tape, which tells you how long ago it was, being passed around that were poems of self-compassion, poetry of self-compassion, read by the British poet David Whyte. And it was at a time when I had little kids. And so I spent a lot of time in my car with my kids in the car seats, trying to get them to go to sleep because they, I guess, didn't like napping. But I had this cassette tape in my car listening to these poems of self-compassion. And I internalized them. I think I just internalized this message. And one of my favorite poems was Mary Oliver, Wild Geese. It still is one of my favorite poems. I know it's a favorite in the MSC world, especially the first line, you do not have to be good. You do not have to be good. So the next line, you do not have to crawl on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. So this message of being kind to yourself and allowing yourself to be the person who you are and know that that is enough. And actually, it's more than enough. It brings a unique, soulful beauty to the world. So that was where I really got connected with self-compassion. About a decade later, I went back to school to get my PhD, and I wanted to bring my mindfulness and self-compassion work more to teens. I had been teaching in the classroom, teaching teens in the classroom this whole time for about 20 years. And so I wanted to bring together these different threads of my life, my mindfulness practice, what I was just learning about self-compassion, because of course we know Kristin Neff's work was first published 2003, and this was about 2008. So bring together that work, my personal practice, along with my lifelong interest in helping youth, particularly teens.
It's fascinating to me that you were practicing meditation as a teen. That's pretty rare especially back then, right?
I think so. I mean, there were people practicing back then for sure. As I said, it was 1975, 73, I think, is when IMS began. So, yeah, there weren't a lot of teens practicing, but it was something that was around. It was something that you didn't talk about very much because it was considered really kind of out there and weird and on the fringes, and kind of like vegetarianism was also.
I love that you have this long period of time where you're not only experiencing things as a teen, but working with teens. And so you have such a great perspective. So tell me a little bit about what you think, how self-compassion is really important for teens.
What we know about the teen experience, and I don't think this has changed over decades, is that teen, because of metacognition that starts happening at the beginning of the teen years, that teens really start becoming more aware of themselves and what's going on in their minds, and start questioning themselves a lot. And it's a time of a lot of change. It's a time of rapid brain development. And so there's a lot of questioning around, who am I? Why am I here? And a lot of self-consciousness. How do I look? Am I acceptable? Do people like me? Is there something wrong with me? Am I weird? Like all those kinds of self-consciousness questions really come to light in the teen years. As we know, what self-compassion teaches us is that you're okay the way you are, and you can be yourself, and you can take care of yourself, and you can support yourself, and you can love yourself. And most of all, get to know yourself and what's important to you, your values, all of it.
Mm, I sure wish I had this work when I was a teen.
Me too. I wish I had it with 15 too.
When you got to the university, is that when you started designing this compassion program for teens?
Yeah, so I went back to graduate school in 2008, and again and really wanted to look into how can what has been so helpful to me for these decades, my mindfulness practice, how can we bring that to teens? And there really wasn't that much work on it at the time. I think there was a handful of studies. I started looking into the research. There wasn't very much. And that's when I came across Kristen's work. And I didn't start designing it self-compassion program then. First, and my dissertation actually looked at the relationship between perceived stress, anxiety, depression, positive, negative affect, life satisfaction, looking at those kinds of things and how they related to mindfulness and self-compassion. So that was the first step. And we know in adults that the more self-compassionate you are, the less stressed you are, the less anxious and less depressed you are. That was just beginning to come out with Kristen's work. And so I wanted to look at, was the same true with teens? And what my dissertation pointed out was, yes, in fact, it was true. And actually, Kristen and Pittman McGehee also published a paper, I think in 2010 or 2011, that found some of that. So I think that was the first paper that came out. That was while I was in graduate school. And then in my postdoc, which started in 2012, is when I started looking into how to adapt the adult MSc program for teens. And so that was my main postdoc project. And was able to get a small grant from my University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, to study that, to look at how we can adapt the MSc program for teens.
Nice. And so tell us a little bit about how it differs from the adult program.
Yeah, well, it's developmentally appropriate, meaning that it's more activity based. It's less, although there's some reflection, of course, there's less reflection. It's more, we have mindful movement in every class. Every class begins with a little bit of art. And the art isn't, as we always tell the teens, the art isn't to create something that you're going to hang on the wall. It's really mindful art, noticing what you're doing as you're drawing, for example. There's a couple of music meditations. There's a couple of games. So it's fun. It's lighter. It's fun. It's activity-based. Yeah.
That sounds like something I would like. Do you have
And
adults that are interested in the teen curriculum?
actually, Cynthia, we've heard from a lot of adults who become trained in this program that, oh my gosh, this is so fun. This is so great. We should teach adults this. And truthfully, my strong belief is we don't play enough as adults at all. We need to play more, but that's a whole other topic, a whole other subject.
Maybe your next curriculum is the play curriculum for adults.
Dancing, moving, having
Yes.
fun. Yeah, we have this one activity that we do in the teen curriculum where we create oobleck, and any early elementary school teacher or preschool teacher knows that what oobleck is, but it's a substance created from cornstarch and water. And it's like the best, like Play-Doh or slime. I mean, it's so fun to play with because, as somebody explained to me, it's a non-Newtonian
Fluid.
substance. So it doesn't follow, it's not a solid, it's not a liquid. It changes from a solid to a liquid, but it's so much fun to play with. And when we've introduced that to adults, we have adults just like screaming with laughter, practically taking off their socks and shoes and walking through it. I mean, it's so fun.
I love it. I love it. And so you do a fair amount of training other teachers to teach this curriculum to teens, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some of the things that are really different about teaching teens versus teaching adults?
Yeah, it's quite different. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is that adults are more comfortable being vulnerable in front of others. For example, frequently adults will talk about what's really coming up for them emotionally. Teens are generally more guarded and less likely to be vulnerable in front of their peers. Understandably, this is where they are developmentally. And so they're quieter. So what we've learned from teaching teens is that inquiry has to be completely different. So we ask specific questions. We don't expect them necessarily to go inwards and talk about their deep emotions that are scary or they're just discovering or that are new to them. So it ends up being a little bit louder. So that's one place where it's different, teaching adults and teaching teens. Adults self-select and they're there because they really want to be there. Often you have teens there because their parents think it's a good idea or their therapist recommended it. And so they're more reluctant when they start out. So there's a little bit of getting over that initial barrier. But once you get past that initial barrier, it's easy.
You have done a whole variety of research on self-compassion and teens. Do you want to share something that maybe was really interesting or surprising that you found?
Overall, what we're seeing is that teens that are more self-compassionate experience less anxiety, depression, and stress. And even in our most recent study with teens who already had some suicidal ideation, once they took our teen self-compassion class, they had less suicidal ideation. I think that came up in a research study was how the physical space matters. And this was a little bit surprising to me. So I was teaching a class in the alternative high school for teens, and we were in the classroom, and it was pretty challenging. It was really hard to get the teens engaged. And once we moved to a corner of the gym, and we did that to do body scan, which was coming up, we needed to stretch out. They were much more relaxed. One of the teens explained to me later was that the classrooms where we experienced failure, that's where, I mean, these were kids who had a lot of challenges in their lives in many, many ways, academics being just one of them. I remember this one teen saying, yeah, that's where we failed. We're not comfortable there. And the gym is where we have fun and stuff. So the physical place really matters. It matters. Other than that, what we see in the research is consistent with what we see in the research with adults, which is that self-compassion is protective against a lot of the challenges of adolescence. So what we know is that as teens move through adolescence, they tend to become more depressed, and that's driven mostly by female identified teens. And when teens are more self-compassionate, they are less likely to be depressed as they get older. We also know that we know that stress is related to depression, but for teens who are more self-compassionate, they're less likely to get depressed when they're stressed. We also know depression is related to self-injury, but teens who are more self-compassionate, when they're depressed, they're less likely to self-injure. So we see this protective quality or this buffering effect of self-compassion.
Wow. Those are some really amazing outcomes. I'm sure the teachers and the parents that are listening, ears have perked up a bit with these outcomes. Does a story stand out for you of a particular teen and their trajectory through the curriculum?
Yeah, there are a number of stories. One, when you talked about trajectory, the story that came to mind, which I've heard over and over again, actually, from many teens, is that a teen will pull me aside after the class, like at the end of the eighth class, and they'll say, I didn't really want to come to class. I only came because my mother really wanted me to, or my therapist thought it was a good idea. But you know what? I really like the class. We've heard this so many times. But one story, one of my favorite stories and I think it was because of the way this kid delivered it, it was so authentic. This is like a 15-year-old boy. We're sitting around talking and he suddenly got quiet and he looked up and he said, I don't care if other kids don't like me. I like me. And it was just so, the way that he said it was so real and so authentic. And all of us were like, oh,
Right. I have a little tear. Like, I just love that for that teen so much. And I love that for me and my little me, right? That I can go back and remind the teen me that's still inside of me that it's okay.
and this is what I want all teens to get. This is kind of like my mission is that I want all teens to understand that you can like yourself and that you matter and you're okay just the way you are.
That is so powerful. If you could kind of encapsulate for a teen that might be listening right now, maybe one simple practice or one simple thing to take away, what do you think is really important?
I think the one message that I would want teens to take away is that you matter, that you matter, that you count, that the world needs you, that the world needs your unique gifts that you have, that, your unique combination of gifts that nobody else in this world has. And the world needs you. So, and that things will get better. Things are hard right now, but they get better, I promise. They get easier. So I think that's the message that I really want teens to get. Some of the practices that the teens have shared with us that they really like is comforting gestures, for example. And I think one of the reasons they really like that is that it's always accessible. It's always there with you at any
It's so
time.
tangible too, right? Like it's really like it's right here.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, it's absolutely tangible. And they like, first of all, they like informal practices more than formal practices for the most part. Again, a generalization. And they like things that are tangible. And that's what's developmentally appropriate, actually. So comforting gestures or using the here and now stone, or when we teach online, we use palm of the hand and noticing things in the palm of your hand. We do music meditation, which they really, really love. And that's just listening to a piece of music, a melodic, soothing piece of music, and bringing your attention back to the music when your mind wanders. So they really like that because they get to choose their own music. And often when we listen to music, it's in the background and we're doing something else. So when we really take the time to really actively listen to the music and pay attention to the music, it's a different experience.
I can imagine. So we will make sure that some of these practices are linked in your teacher bio in the app. So if you are a parent or a teen that's listening, that you can get access to some of those favorite practices. That's awesome. One of the things that we run into when we teach adults self-compassion is there's often this resistance to wanting to practice self-compassion because you're worried about your productivity or your success. And it feels like, well, if I'm too nice to myself, then there's no way I'm going to be successful. Does that also come up with teens?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, initially, very early on, when we developed our Self Compassion for Teens program, we didn't have the doubts, the misgivings incorporated in there. But very soon, in the early years, we put it in um, because the teens had doubts, and teens would say things like, "I want to get good grades. I want to get into a good college. I want to be successful. I want to do well as a soccer player or in my musical instrument," whatever it was that they wanted for themselves, or however they defined success. They had doubts whether they would end up lying on the couch, binging on Netflix. And so when we teach this, we bring in the research and we talk about this is what the research says. And what the research says is when you're self compassionate, you're actually more likely to move outside of your comfort zone and embrace new experiences. And we have research with teens that shows this. And the reason is completely understandable that you don't have as much fear of failure when you're self compassionate. So a lot of times we resist trying new things or moving outside of our comfort zone because we're afraid we're going to fail. When you're self compassionate and you try something new and let's say it doesn't go well, we say, well, maybe that wasn't the right thing for me, or maybe it's not the right thing right now. Maybe at a later point, it'll be fine, or maybe I need to try it a different way or whatever. It's not like, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person. I'm a failure. So it's understandable, really, that when you're self compassionate, you're more likely to be motivated and try new things.
My work that I do that I've honed in on in self-compassion is around the inner critic and how we use our voice to speak to ourselves, to support ourselves and be compassionate. And is there any difference in the inner critic in the teens versus the adults, or is it pretty much the same way of helping the teens to work with their inner critic?
I would say it's pretty similar. We do a similar inner critic activity. We really stress not to banish the inner critic from your mind or whatever, that the inner critic started out there to help you. And I guess maybe one slight difference is that we talk about how we have an inherent belief, inherent need to belong, and that this is not because we're weak or because we're lacking in some way and we need other people. It's because this is how human beings are. Human beings are social creatures and need other people. What the inner critic is doing is guiding you in a way so that you'll belong and so that you'll be acceptable to others. And so we don't want to completely get rid of the inner critic. We want to acknowledge that the inner critic is here and some has a purpose, but that we don't have to listen to it all the time, that it can get very heavy-handed and go over the top. And we can just say to the inner critic, you know what? Thank you. Have a seat. In my mind, what I imagine is like a doctor's office and there's a couch. And it's like, I say to my inner critic, have a seat. I'm not going to listen to you right now. Thanks for being here, but I'm going to listen to this other voice that's kinder, that also wants me to do well, be successful, but it's not so hard on me. No,
Yeah, a little more gentle and kind.
a little
Well,
kind.
I love the focus on belonging for the teens because that is so developmentally challenging for them, right? Because you're just trying to figure that whole thing out as a teen. When you are teaching teens, or your teachers that you've taught are teaching teens, what role do parents play in the whole process other than like telling their kid they're going to go whether they like it or not?
Yeah, it's tricky with teens and parents because, again, developmentally, teens are in a place where they're individuating from their parents, right? They want to be their own people. They have their own ideas. And this is where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be figuring out who they are and their place in the world and in society and all that. So they don't necessarily want to listen to their parents' suggestions. Parents are also evolving. I remember this as a parent myself. Like, it was just like last week that I was curating your life and, where you go and how you go there and how you get there. And you're going to softball practice and you're going to music lessons or whatever. And now all of a sudden I can't do that. And you're pushing back, right? So we actually have a session, a piece in our self-compassion program for teens, where we talk about this and we talk about how there's this push and pull happening with parents. So it helps the teens to understand where the parents are coming from. And we actually use a video clip from the movie The Croods, where there's a teen in there who's like really pushing back on her dad. And so we talk about that. We talk about what the teens are going through and what the parents are going through and how we can, first of all, try to be a little patient with each other, but also how do you take care of yourself when these conflicts are coming and when you're struggling with a parent, for example. The relationship and how to deal with this with parents is tricky. Of course, so many parents come to us saying their kid is struggling, they want to help, how can they help? And it's really, of course, it depends a lot on the relationship between the parent and the teen, but sometimes you're limited as a parent, unfortunately. The best thing I think parents can do is just model self-compassion. Learn how to, if you don't already know, if you haven't already taken MSc or, read some of the self-compassion books that are out there, do what you can to learn how to be kinder to yourself and model it in front of teens, model it in front of your kids. Talk about like, okay, I just made this huge mistake at work. I have a choice right now. I can either be hard on myself and tell myself, oh my gosh, that was so stupid. You're such an idiot. Why did you do that? Or I can say to myself, you've got a lot on your plate and you're human and you made a mistake. And this is not going to last forever. You're not going to get fired. Things will work out. And you can model that whole decision-making process in front of your teens.
Must be such a transition for parents, like you said, going from telling a child what to do and how to stay safe and how to be in the world to having to just model that. Because if you tell the teen is going to do the opposite of wherever that is.
Yeah, it depends on the teen, but often what we get is pushback, resistance.
Do you have any advice for parents who want to foster a more self-compassion mindset with their kids beyond the modeling? Do you ever work with parents directly?
I don't work with parents directly, no, but there are other people who do. But I think overall, in order to model self-compassion, there's no shortcut. You can't fake it. You have to be self-compassionate. You have to cultivate that in yourself. And you should anyway, right? You should anyway for yourself. So do it for yourself and do it for your. And there are teachers who teach younger kids who have a parent-child program where they teach parents and kids together. So that's another possibility, another way to go. Also, I have an Audible book that's out. That's Self-Compassion for Teens. It's free if you have an Audible subscription. It's specifically around self-compassion for teen girls, but there's a lot in there that would be helpful for teen boys also.
That's a wonderful resource. I would love to take a peek at some of the resources that you've created. Do you want to show us the workbook?
Sure. So this is the first book that I came out with, and this is the Self-Compassion Workbook for Teens. This was published 2017. What I hear from teens is that it's been really helpful for them.
Do teens use the workbook with the program that they go through, or can they use it independently?
They use it independently. Yeah, we don't
Okay.
use it for the program.
Okay.
They use it independently. So the reason that I wrote this book was because we couldn't get the teen program to all teens, obviously. We were here from teens in
Right.
places where we didn't have teachers. This is pre-pandemic. Now, of course, we're teaching a lot more online, but we couldn't get to a lot of teens. So we wanted to have a resource for them that they could go to and work through on their own.
Nice. Excellent. Can you give us a peek inside what that workbook looks like?
Sure. Let's see. I just open to an arbitrary place. We have sections that what teens say about it. This was a section about the here and now stuff. This was one that I really liked. So this is me. This is my personal story. And it was about mindfulness. And it was about when I was really not being very mindful at all. I was on an exercise bike at the gym and looking at an image. There was a video of mountain path, and I'm going around this mountain path. And on one side, there was this steep drop off and cliffs on the other side or something. I don't know what I did, but I thought I was going off into this ravine off this cliff. And my heart started beating really, really hard. I really felt I was going off the cliff. And then I realized, wait, you're on an exercise bike. You're in the gym. You're not on that mountain path. But it was just an example of this is what our bodies can respond. Like my body was like in full fight or flight mode. Our bodies respond to what's going on in our minds. And we have some control over what goes on in our minds. And that's where practice is helpful.
Mm. That's a great story because that's such a visual metaphor, like being on a treadmill and thinking you're going off a cliff. Our brain does that to us all the time.
Right, right, right. It's like anticipating something that might happen. We think it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened. And yet we have this anxiety and we're
Right.
already imagining like all these horrible things that will happen.
Yeah, right. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. As I'm saying this, honestly, Cynthia, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of like, oh my gosh, I can think of all the times and that even recently where this comes up, but with practice, you can catch yourself more quickly.
There
It's
you
like
go.
you feel your mind like, oh my gosh, I'm going off on this like fear thing. And wait, that's not here. That's not what's happening right now. That's what's going on in your mind. That's your anxiety about what could potentially maybe down the road happen rather than what's here right now.
So just a simple practice like I am safe, I am
Mhm.
here now can be so self-compassionate.
Yep. Soles of the feet. I am here right now. I can feel my feet on the ground. One hand in the other hand. I can feel my hands touching each other.
And so it sounds like this workbook has some great stories, lessons, interactivities where the students, are they writing in the workbook?
Yes, they're running the workbook. There's some art, different kinds of art things in the workbook also. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's a wonderful resource. And I know you've also written another book that is a little more geared towards schools.
Yeah. So I've written a few other books, but the one that you're referring to is one that came out last year, which is this one.
Nice.
I was really pushed to do this by some colleagues because what we know is that our teen self-compassion program often only reaches those kids whose parents know about self-compassion and have the resources to pay for their after-school program for their teen. Whereas this was really an opportunity where we could get it into schools, which is, I know, a big hurdle, but this is the first step. So in this book, I broke down the 8 different classes, the 8 different sessions of our Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens class into 16 different sessions. So they're shorter. And so it's a whole curriculum. There's also a section of the book that has drop-in sessions. So 10 to 15 minute long, what I'm calling drop-in sessions where a school counselor can go into the classroom for 10 or 15 minutes and do a practice or do an exercise. The reason that I did that was because I was told by school counselors that we don't necessarily have the time to do a whole curriculum. We just need 15 minutes. So there's a section for that. There's also a section at the beginning, how to set up your classroom, how to transition from the regular class to teaching self-compassion, a couple different ways to do inquiry in the classroom. There are worksheets that go along with this which is really promote reflection on what's happening when you do this exercise. So it allows the teens to go inward in a way that they're not being vulnerable in front of their peers, that they're self-reflecting and they're writing down what they experience. And teachers don't collect these worksheets. They're only for the kids, they're only for the teens. It's really quite a project, and I'm just thrilled to death that it's out and it's available for schools and educators and teens, most of all.
It sounds like anybody in that kind of school ecosystem could use it.
It's funny. I think about this often. When we create something, we really have to obviously think of our audience.
Yep.
Like, what are their needs? And not just the emotional needs, but the logistical needs. Like, what's going to work? Because otherwise, like, you could create something beautiful, and if it doesn't meet their logistical needs, it's not going to amount to anything, right? So we need to think about that.
Now, I know that you just launched a new website. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I am so, so thrilled with this and so happy. So this is a self-compassion website for teens. And the purpose of it is just to provide resources for teens so that they can learn about self-compassion, what it is, how it works, what do we know about it. If they want to go deeper in, if they want to take a class or they want to buy a book or whatever, there's a place there. There's one webpage that's teen stories, kids who have from all over, really all over the world, who have learned about self-compassion in whatever way they have, and how it's been for them, what they've learned from it, and how maybe it changed their lives a little bit, or a lot, in some cases, a lot. So the idea is resources, to provide resources for teens that are teen friendly, that they can go to and that they can learn what self-compassion is.
Well, that's great. It really didn't exist because most of the things out there were not necessarily directed right at the teens. So thank you so much for curating, and we'll make sure that that URL is linked as well so people can get to it.
Yeah, thanks. And it's still a work in progress. I guess most websites are, but yeah, we're still adding to it and we'll be adding to it for some time. And yeah.
Karen, you have taught so many wonderful teens over the years. Is there any story that comes to mind that you would like to share with us before we go?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. And the one that comes to mind is I was teaching self-compassion to kids who were hospitalized for eating disorders. And there was one teen who was very quiet through the whole class, which often happens. Often teens are quiet through the whole class. And then at the end of the class, we were wrapping up and everybody's going around and saying something that they got from the class. And I remember she kind of looked up and said, "This was very eye-opening." And I think it stayed with me because, first of all, she hadn't said anything during the whole class, but yet she was obviously listening, paying attention. And then the other reason I think it stayed with me was because it is eye-opening. That's exactly what it is for teens. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't have to beat myself up. I don't have to be so hard on myself. I can be happy and be successful and without beating myself up so much. So yeah, I think that's why that story really stayed with me. I just want all teens to be able to have their eyes opened to this. I mean, that's what this is all about for me, quite frankly, is I want all teens to have their eyes opened and see that they don't have to be so hard on themselves.
Beautiful.
These years do not have to be so hard.
Thank you so much for your wisdom. And if people want to engage with you or learn more from you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, the best way is through my website, which is karenbluth.com. So no spaces, karenbluth.com. Pretty easy. And sign up for my newsletter. When you go to the website, there'll be something that pops up. Everybody's familiar with this. And just sign up for my newsletter. I don't send out a lot, maybe one or two a month, something like that. And my newsletter is chiefly about what's coming up, workshops, trainings, things like that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time to share about your work with teens for us today.
And thank you so much for having me, Cynthia. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.